There's a moment in sports when something shifts. When the noise gets loud enough that even the people who usually stay quiet can't help but speak up. That moment happened recently in women's tennis, and it came from one of the most recognizable voices the sport has ever produced. John McEnroe, 7-time Grand Slam champion, a man who built his career on saying exactly what he thought regardless of who was listening, sat down in front of a microphone and said something that sent shockwaves through the entire tennis world. Not because it was controversial. Because it was true. And the people running women's tennis had no answer for it. But to understand why McEnroe's words hit the way they did, you have to understand who Alex is. You have to understand what she represents and why a 20-year-old from the Philippines has become arguably the most talked about player in women's tennis without a single Grand Slam title to her name. Alex is not just a tennis player. She never really was. From the moment she started competing on the senior tour, something followed her that you simply cannot manufacture, cannot buy, and cannot fake. Fans. Real fans. The kind who book flights, sleep in airports, paint their faces, and stand outside stadiums for hours just for the chance to catch a glimpse of her walking to practice. The kind of fans that most sports would kill for. At the Australian Open, her first-round match was scheduled on court 6, which under normal circumstances would be a fairly routine assignment for a player of her ranking. Except nothing about Alex is routine. The queue that formed outside that court wrapped entirely around Melbourne Park. Thousands of people who couldn't get in stood outside just to hear the crowd react. Tournament officials scrambled. The atmosphere inside that relatively small court was more electric than most center court matches at major events. And this was a first-round match. Let that sink in. Then came Dubai, where ticket sales jumped 48% the moment her name was confirmed in the draw. Not the whole tournament. Just because she was going to be there. Then came Miami, where she didn't just perform on the court but completely dominated off it, with her jersey outselling every single other player in the entire tournament combined. Every player. Not just the top seeds. Every player. And then something happened that nobody in professional tennis had quite prepared for. The Linz Open. And that's where everything exploded. The tournament had put Alex in their draw, and with her name on the schedule, Filipino fans did what Filipino fans always do. They showed up. They traveled from across Europe. They bought their tickets. They made the trip. Because when Alex plays, her community moves with her. That's not an exaggeration. That is the reality of what she has created. But when those fans arrived at the venue, hundreds of them were turned away. The tournament, citing safety concerns and what they described as unprecedented crowd density, blocked them from entering to watch her first-round match. Think about that for a second. You buy a ticket. You travel hours to get there. You walk up to the gate. And you're told no. Not because you did anything wrong. Not because there was a genuine emergency. But because the tournament didn't know how to handle the volume of love that one player had generated. The reaction online was immediate and it was fierce. Filipino fans were heartbroken and furious in equal measure. The hashtag Let Alex Play spread across every platform within hours. Philippine news outlets ran it on their front pages. Players started speaking up. And the WTA released a carefully worded statement about safety protocols that managed to say a lot of words while explaining absolutely nothing. It was exactly the kind of corporate non-answer that makes angry people angrier. And that's the moment John McEnroe walked up to the microphone. See, McEnroe has this quality that very few people in any sport possess. He doesn't perform outrage. He doesn't dress things up in diplomatic language to protect relationships or avoid upsetting the wrong people. When he thinks something is wrong, he says it's wrong, and he tells you exactly why. He's been doing it for 4 decades and he's not stopping now. So when he looked into that camera and started talking about Alex, he wasn't reading from a script or following a talking point. He was being John McEnroe. And what came out was something that the tennis establishment really didn't want to hear. He called her special. Not in the polite throwaway sense that commentators use when they're filling airtime. He meant it with full conviction, the way someone speaks when they've genuinely seen something that surprises them. He talked about watching her play and noticing something different. Something beyond the quality of her tennis, which he acknowledged was impressive. Something in the way she carries herself, the way she manages pressure, the way she makes every single person in the building feel like they matter. Then he said something that stopped people mid-scroll when the clip started circulating. He said he had been in tennis for over 40 years. That he had watched Bjorn Borg and Jimmy Connors in their prime. That he had been there for Sampras, for Federer, for Nadal, for Djokovic. That he had seen Serena Williams become the greatest women's player the sport had ever produced. And then he said he had never, not once in all of that time, seen a player connect with fans the way Alex does. Not at her age. Not without a Grand Slam title. Not sitting outside the top 10 in the rankings. Never. Coming from anyone else, that might sound like hyperbole. Coming from McEnroe, a man who has literally seen everything this sport has produced across multiple generations, it lands completely differently. It lands like a statement of fact from someone who has no reason to exaggerate. But McEnroe wasn't done. Because praising Alex was only half of what he came to say. The other half was about the people trying to hold her back. He didn't use careful language. He didn't hedge. He said the WTA was scared. Scared of a player they couldn't control. Scared of a fan base they couldn't predict. Scared of a phenomenon they simply didn't understand. And then he walked through the evidence piece by piece, the way only someone who has spent decades understanding the politics of professional tennis can do. He talked about the Australian Open and what happened when they put her on court 6. He talked about Dubai and the ticket surge. He talked about Miami and the merchandise numbers. And then he came back to Linz, and his voice carried something that sounded genuinely close to disbelief. He said you cannot build your tournament around a player's name, use her face to sell tickets and drive interest, and then when her fans actually show up, treat them like a problem to be managed rather than the very reason your tournament matters. He called it hypocritical. He called it a disgrace. And the clip spread everywhere within hours. Now here's the thing about criticism landing with real weight. It's not just about what's being said. It's about who's saying it. McEnroe is not some anonymous account on the internet. He is not a pundit trying to manufacture controversy for clicks. He is a living legend of the sport, someone who played alongside and against the greatest names of his generation, someone who transitioned into broadcasting and spent decades becoming one of the most respected voices in tennis commentary. When he calls out an organization, sponsors notice. Broadcast partners notice. Other players notice. The WTA's carefully managed public image starts developing cracks that are very hard to repair. And the fans noticed most of all. The Filipino community, which had been quietly absorbing slight after slight for months, watching Alex get scheduled on small courts while lesser draws got center stage, watching tournament directors question her commercial value and then turn around and build their marketing around her, watching the organization fumble every single time her fanbase showed up in force, finally had someone in the establishment reflecting their frustration back at them. One fan wrote that McEnroe was saying what they had been feeling all along. Another pointed out that the WTA had been trying to manage the Alex situation ever since she beat a top player in Miami, and the establishment realized they had something on their hands they weren't prepared for. And outside the venue in Linz, the protests grew. Signs appeared that quoted McEnroe directly. The chants got louder. And the WTA, for the first time, looked like an organization genuinely struggling to respond to something it hadn't anticipated. Now let's talk about Alex herself for a moment, because she is at the center of all of this and she deserves more than just being discussed as a symbol or a phenomenon. She is a 20-year-old athlete who has been competing at the highest level of professional tennis since her teens, who spent 7 years training at the Rafa Nadal Academy, who has had Rafael Nadal himself speak publicly about her talent and her future, who has had Novak Djokovic weigh in on the crowd situations around her matches with something approaching admiration. She is sitting at number 45 in the world rankings after dropping from a career high of 29, largely because the point system works against players who have breakthrough moments at specific tournaments and then can't defend those points the following year. Her ranking does not tell you the full story of who she is or what she means to the sport right now. What her ranking cannot measure is that she is almost certainly the most commercially valuable player in women's tennis at this moment in time. It cannot measure the fact that when her name is in a draw, ticket systems crash. It cannot measure the fact that her jersey outsells everyone else. It cannot measure what happens to an arena when she walks out to warm up, the way the entire energy of the building shifts, the noise level that hits before she's even struck a ball. Those things don't show up in the WTA rankings. But they show up everywhere else. And that gap between what the system measures and what the reality is has become the central tension of her story. McEnroe addressed that tension directly. He talked about how the ranking system, designed for a different era of the sport, is fundamentally failing to capture the value of players like Alex who transformed the commercial and cultural landscape of tennis. He talked about how tournament infrastructure built decades ago isn't equipped to handle what her fan base brings. And he said plainly that the WTA had a choice to make. They could either adapt to this new reality or keep fighting battles they were going to lose. Because the fans weren't going anywhere. And neither was Alex. After McEnroe's words spread across social media and the international press picked up the story, something interesting happened inside the tennis world. The conversation changed. It was no longer just fans and Filipino community members making noise online. It was a 7-time Grand Slam champion who had been in the sport for 40 years saying publicly that the establishment was handling this badly. Tennis analysts started weighing in. One pointed out that McEnroe isn't a commentator looking for attention.
He's an institution.
When he calls out an organization at that level, it creates a pressure that is very difficult to ignore. Sponsors who invest in tournaments think about public perception. Broadcast partners who pay for the rights to show these events think about what kind of stories they want associated with their coverage. And the WTA, which needs both sponsors and broadcast deals to function, had suddenly found itself on the wrong side of a story being told by one of the most respected voices in their own sport. And Alex, through all of this, handled it with a composure